The subcommittee will now come to order. That makes her quiet down real quick. This is the fourth in our ongoing series of hearings on online privacy. When our work is finally finished, my goal is to point to a better way to protect consumer privacy and to promote e-commerce at the same time. In the end, this will benefit both American consumers and American businesses and preserve a strongly held belief all across our nation and around the world that the Internet should remain free. The Chair will now recognize herself for an opening statement. When it comes to online privacy, at least for me, consumer attitudes and expectations are the bits and the bytes that matter the most. Do Americans really believe enough is being done today to protect their online privacy? Are they taking advantage of the many privacy tools currently available to them? Do they even know about these tools? If not, why not? And do these privacy features, for the most part, really work? Or is it time for Congress to finally legislate in this area? This is a hearing that I've been looking forward to for a very long time because it is the first time we've tried to quantify what consumers expect and want. This is where the rubber hits the road with respect to online privacy. Today, there is no single federal law expressly governing all data collection in the United States. Instead, there's a confusing hodgepodge of more than 300 state and federal laws. Likewise, there is no single regulator to enforce all these privacy-related laws. Rather, an industry-specific approach has emerged whereby Congress has restricted consumer data collection and use by subject matter and provided the enforcement authority to the relevant federal agency. As it stands today, the Federal Trade Commission arguably has the broadest jurisdiction to enforce general privacy violations under its Section 5 authority, defining unfair or deceptive acts or practices. Since 2001, the Commission has brought 34 cases against companies that failed to protect consumer information, including when companies failed to adhere to their own stated privacy policy. In recent years, both policymakers and stakeholders have expressed increasing concerns regarding the collection and availability of consumers' personal information online. Increased data collection and storage by websites, information brokers, direct marketers, ISPs, and advertisers have been driven in large part by the rapid decline of the associated costs of data processing and storage, while at the same time the value of consumer information has increased significantly. As we know, data about consumers' online behavior is being used today to target ads, increasing the likelihood of a sale of a particular product. Is this bad? Not necessarily. But is this process transparent enough, and do consumers have enough information and tools available to them to be able to opt out of having their data collected and shared with unknown parties if they so choose? In many ways, this is the very root of the privacy issue. In response to growing concerns over online data collection and use, particularly regarding behavioral advertising, the online advertising community developed a self-regulatory model to provide consumers with notice and choice about advertisements delivered to them through behavioral targeting. The Digital Advertising Alliance developed and implemented these so-called about ads to provide consumers more information on why they are seeing a particular ad and to provide them a mechanism to opt out of future ads directed at them based on behavioral advertising. Later, the FTC took things a step further, proposing a number of principles to enhance consumer choices regarding privacy, including the concept of a do-not-track mechanism. Since a hearing in the last Congress on do-not-track legislation, the two most popular browser developers, Microsoft's Internet Explorer and Mozilla's Firefox, have both designed and incorporated a do-not-track feature into their browsers. These features are user-controlled, so consumers must choose to turn them on to actually prevent tracking. Internet Explorer blocks content from sites that are on tracking protection lists and that could otherwise use the content to collect information. Mozilla's Firefox broadcasts its signal to each website a consumer actually visits, communicating the consumer's desire not to have his or her information collected. Clearly, the effectiveness of Mozilla's approach faces significant hurdles because every website that receives a signal from the consumer's browser must choose to honor the request, and currently there is no requirement that websites must do so. So what do consumers think about all of this? And when it comes to the Internet, how do we, as Congress and as Americans, balance the need to remain innovative with the need to protect privacy? Clearly, the explosive growth of technology has made it possible to collect information about consumers in increasingly sophisticated ways. Sometimes the collection and use of this information is extremely beneficial, other times it's not. Despite everything that I've heard in our previous hearings, I still remain somewhat skeptical right now of both industry and government. Frankly, I don't believe industry has proven that it's doing enough to protect American consumers, while government, unfortunately, tends to overreach whenever it comes to new regulations. That's why I'm so anxious today to hit the refresh key to learn the latest about consumer attitudes and expectations. And with that, I'm happy to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for his opening statement for 5 minutes.
Let me thank you, Chairman Bono Mack, for holding this very important hearing today. This is no doubt a very important issue to all of us. You spoke with me when we first started the subcommittee at the beginning of the session, and you told me of your keen interest in this issue, and I want to thank you for pursuing this hearing today. This forum provides an opportunity to look at expectations and attitudes about privacy from a consumer's point of view. And these witnesses that we have today, all 6 of them, will no doubt share with us some very valuable perspectives. The bottom line is that consumers want and expect privacy, whether they're online hopping from one website to another or buying a few things at a chain grocery store. But sometimes the privacy consumers expect isn't respected. And for example, the information collection practices by online tracking firms for purposes of behavioral advertising aren't generally visible to consumers. And when those consumers that know it's happening don't always know how to achieve the level of privacy they want with the tools available to them. I understand that online advertising is big business. We all know that. And last year, revenue from all types of online and advertising totaled $26 billion. This revenue helps to support free access to a lot of the online content consumers have come to expect. A small but growing segment of this revenue is coming from behavioral advertising. And I think most of us by now understand how that works. But let me nonetheless try to describe it in my own way. Imagine that I'm in the market for a new car, let's say a Ford Explorer. Since I drive a 2000 Ford Explorer, let's say I'm in the market for another Ford Explorer. I visit some online car comparison websites, and there are many. I visit the manufacturer's website, and then I decide to put off buying a car for another day or two. I go to the website of a daily newspaper, and all of a sudden, there are advertisements on some of the pages for, you guessed it, a Ford Explorer. This happens through the installation of cookies on my computer, although some in the industry have resorted to more persistent and less visible tracking tools. Those cookies allow an advertiser to track my online activities across multiple websites and ultimately serve me up a tailored advertisement for a vehicle that I had previously expressed an interest. I appreciate the amazing business opportunities made possible by behavioral advertising. I understand that consumers are probably more likely to purchase goods and services after seeing an advertisement if it is relevant to their likes and interests. However, a leading academic study of consumer attitudes toward behavioral advertising found they don't want it. That study found that 66% of survey participants did not want tailored advertising. The number that didn't want tailored advertising jumped to 84%. When participants were asked if it would be okay to base that tailoring off of tracking a consumer's activities across websites. The number jumped to 86% when participants were asked if it would be okay to base tailored advertising on offline activities, like using a discount card at the grocery store. One thing is clear, consumers aren't clamoring for tailored advertising, and they become more uncomfortable when asked about the sorts of tracking activities that enable it. The finding of another study on consumer attitudes sums it up best. 64% of participants agreed that someone keeping track of my activities online is invasive, while only 4% disagree. I will be clear. I support the online advertising industry. I have told them that, and respect the central role that ads play in supporting a free Internet ecosystem. However, I strongly believe that consumers have the right to know up front when their online activities are being tracked, what activities are being tracked, and what that information will be used for, as well as the option to opt out of having their information collected entirely, not just from receiving targeted ads. The online advertising industry has responded to privacy concerns by creating a self-regulatory program for behavioral advertising that provides consumers with websites and that allows them to opt out from receiving behavioral advertising from participating companies. I appreciate this effort. I still feel strongly that a national baseline privacy law is the best way to ensure consumers have basic common sense and permanent rights over the collection and use of their information. Again, thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to welcome all of our witnesses here today. We're delighted to have you here to participate in this discussion. And as we talk about tech policy and the virtual marketplace today, we're talking about government regulating the use of data and what that interface is going to be. As we've worked through this issue, as the chairwoman said, this is our 4th hearing on this. I've decided that this data should be treated as a natural resource and that the DNA of this data is very powerful. It really is the lifeblood of a thriving internet economy. So here are some questions for you. Should we allow our free market to explore this natural resource and learn to commercialize it, protect it, and respect it? Or are we going to restrict it altogether? Why should government be the decision maker? Government seems to know so little, it reacts slowly, works poorly. And I was reading a quote from one of my favorite economists, F.A. Hayek, Frederick Hayek, who wrote the book Road to Serfdom. And as I had to remind a college student recently, that is S-E-R-F-D-O-M, not S-U-R-F-D-O-M. Let me give you this quote. It's the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design, end quote. I think that is very relevant to this discussion that we're having about privacy in the virtual marketplace. We don't know what consumers' true expectations are about online privacy. Consumers are different. Their expectations are not static, whether they are 2 or 20 or 82. And innovation moves 500 times faster than what we see government moving, and we don't need to pretend that government has all the answers. Our thriving tech and ad industries are infinitely more responsive and better equipped to meet consumer needs than a federal government program that is one size fits all. In my opinion, our foundation for policy should be flexible, encourage beneficial use of data, protect against real harms, empower people instead of government. I look forward to your testimony, and at this time I yield to Mr. Barton of Texas.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. I want to read the Third Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It says, "No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law." Now that's the Third Amendment, the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. If the Founding Fathers had the Internet, instead of saying that without the consent of the owner to put soldiers in your home, they would have said without the consent of the Internet user, they couldn't collect data. I want to put my support to what the ranking member, Mr. Butterfield, just said. I think it's time that the Congress of the United States pass a strong, general, explicit privacy protection law. We have approached the use of the Internet more from a marketing standpoint, that apparently each of us that uses the Internet individually exists to primarily be marketed, and not as individuals that have guaranteed rights under the Constitution. Now, the Constitution does not explicitly guarantee the right to privacy, but they wouldn't have put the Third Amendment about putting soldiers in your home without your consent if they didn't at least implicitly understand that every person in the United States at that time had the right to privacy. Every week, Madam Chairwoman, we hear some other additional outrage about the abuse of the internet, whether it's a super cookie that somebody can put on your computer without your knowledge and you can't get it off. Now, my staff yesterday told me that one of our leading internet companies, Amazon, is going to create their own server and their own system, and they're going to force everybody that uses Amazon to go through their server, and they're going to collect all this information on each person who does that without that person's knowledge. I mean, enough is enough, Madam Chairwoman. We have over 240 million Americans who use the internet every day. Each of those 240 million Americans are entitled, in my opinion, to the right to privacy. With that, I want to yield the balance of the time to Mr. Olson of Texas.
I thank my colleague, the Chairman Emeritus from Texas. I thank the Chairwoman. As we continue our hearings on online privacy issues, we need to ask ourselves two fundamental questions. Number one, when it comes to privacy protections in the online space, is there an issue industry can't correct on their own through self-regulatory initiatives? And number two, if there's a problem that industry can't correct without negatively impacting jobs, our struggling economy, and the growth and innovation we're seeing in online space, can the government correct these problems? Today's hearing is important because we will hear directly from industry about what they're doing on their own to better provide transparency and privacy for customers online. One key advantage industry has over government is the ability to quickly adapt to changes in consumer demands and changes in technology. So I thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to their testimony. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And now we turn our attention to our panel. We have one panel of witnesses joining us today. Each of our witnesses has prepared an opening statement that will be placed into the record. Each of you will have 5 minutes to summarize that statement in your remarks. A special welcome to the Californians on the panel, recognizing it is 6:25 for your body clocks. We have a special appreciation for your appearance here today. But on our panel, we have Barbara Lawler, Chief Privacy Officer at Intuit. Then we have Michael Heinze, yes? Hinsey, I'm so sorry, Associate General Counsel at Microsoft. Then we have Scott Meyer, Chief Executive Officer at Evidon. Our fourth witness is Linda Woolley, Executive Vice President of the Direct Market Association. Our fifth witness is Alessandro Acquisti, Associate Professor of Information Systems and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. And our final witness is Pam Dixon, Executive Director at the World Privacy Forum. Good morning, and thank you all again for coming. You will be recognized for 5 minutes. To keep track of the time, you have the timers in front of you, and green, yellow, red, self-explanatory, but please try to wrap it up when you get to yellow, so when it hits red, your 5 minutes is up. Ms. Lawler, if you could pull your microphone forward, turn it on, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on consumer expectations around privacy. I'm Barb Lawler, the Chief Privacy Officer at Intuit. I ask that my full statement be put into the record due to the time constraints. Intuit is well positioned to comment on consumer expectations about privacy. Over 50 million customers entrust us with their most personal financial information. We've been committed to innovating and implementing the safest and most responsible ways to work with consumers' financial information for nearly 30 years. Understanding our customers' expectations about online privacy and earning their trust is a major priority at Intuit. Intuit recently undertook a comprehensive research program that examined our customers' expectations about privacy. Our customers told us they expect Intuit to be an ethical steward of their information, applying it reasonably and with integrity for their benefit, while keeping it safe and secure. Our research strongly informed the development of our data stewardship principles. The unifying concept is that it is the customer's data, not ours. Our principles provide our customers with tools to understand how their data is being used and empower them with choices to control the use of their data. These fundamentals were based on a number of key insights we learned from our customer research project. First, we learned that data privacy matters to consumers. While many people do not pore over privacy policy statements, they do care deeply about privacy and how their data is used. Customers told us the fine print's often confusing, and they prefer simple, easy-to-read explanations of how their data will be applied and used in service to their needs. Second, we found that customers want clear, relevant, and context-based choices that educate and empower them to control the use of their data. When a choice is presented in relevant context and coupled with a simple explanation, most customers felt empowered to make choices and then welcomed the use of their data. Finally, confidence increases when consumers clearly understand how their data can be applied to benefit them. In the absence of clear statement and principles, customers can worry that their data will be sold to third parties to benefit someone else or possibly harm them. When data-driven benefits are clearly outlined to consumers in responsible ways, their attitudes toward the use of their data significantly changed. Data-driven innovations can equip individuals and small business owners with new tools and insights that once were only available to much larger and more powerful companies. Our research showed a tremendous appetite for such products and services amongst both consumers and small business owners. For example, Intuit developed capabilities for small business owners to compare themselves along key metrics for similarly situated businesses in the same geography. Imagine if your local florist could compare his regular spending trends, soil, marketing, or delivery trucks anonymously with those of other florists in his region of the country. This kind of service involves the use of the customer's own data in a way that brings meaningful value to their lives and financial well-being. As we move toward a connected services cloud-based economy, it's vital that we develop clear and practical privacy frameworks that answer the concerns and expectations of consumers, regardless of the technology or the device they choose to use. Data stewardship represents our ongoing commitment to act as an accountable organization to our customers and to the public. We see data stewardship as a clear and practical privacy policy framework for the 21st century. We all must work towards the shared goal of protecting consumers while maintaining data-driven innovation that improves consumers' lives in trusted, real, and fundamental ways. Thank you again for this opportunity. We look forward to working with you in the committee towards this important goal.
Thank you, Ms. Lawler. Mr. Hinsey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and honorable members of the committee. My name is Mike Hinsey, and I'm an Associate General Counsel at Microsoft. Thank you for the opportunity to share Microsoft's perspective on the important issue of consumer attitudes about privacy. We appreciate the leadership this subcommittee has shown on this topic, and we're committed to working with you and others to protect consumer privacy while promoting innovation. The diverse products and services through which Microsoft engages with consumers gives us a unique perspective on the privacy discussion. We have a strong commitment to privacy because we recognize that consumer trust is critical to the adoption of online services. Our goal at Microsoft is to build trust with consumers by providing them with information about what data is being collected and how it is being used, offering choices about the collection and use of that data, and ensuring that their data is kept secure. In our experience, there is no silver bullet solution to privacy. This is because privacy means different things to different consumers, and there's a wide range of privacy sensitivities among individuals. Consumers also have different privacy expectations depending on the context in which their data is collected and used. Finally, as technology evolves, customer expectations about privacy often evolve with it. These challenges require a multifaceted approach to addressing consumer privacy. In our view, this approach should focus on 4 key elements. The first element is company best practices. At Microsoft, we have a deep and long-standing commitment to privacy in how we design our products and services and how we operate our business. We believe in adopting practices that provide consumers with information and choices to enable them to exercise more control over their privacy. Let me provide some examples of how consumers have responded to that approach. Over the past 5 months, key privacy websites offered by just one division of our company averaged over 2 million sessions per month. In an average month, more than 435,000 consumers access our Advertisement Choice website. This site provides information about personalized online advertisements and how consumers can opt out or use other controls. Approximately 20% of those consumers perform some action while visiting that site, in most cases opting out of personalized ads. As these numbers make clear, when we provide consumers with information and meaningful controls, many will use them. The second element is technology tools that empower users to protect themselves as they interact with other sites across the Internet. For example, we were the first major browser manufacturer to respond to the FTC's recent call for a persistent browser-based do not track mechanism. In Internet Explorer 9, we offer this feature which we call tracking protection. It allows consumers to decide which third-party sites can receive their data and filters contents from sites identified as potential privacy threats. But no company can meet consumer privacy expectations on its own. So the third element that can contribute to the protection of consumer privacy involves baseline rules of the road established by both industry self-regulation and legislation. Industry self-regulation in particular plays an important role in fostering privacy solutions and can offer flexible approaches for protecting privacy in many different contexts. We also have long supported federal baseline privacy legislation as a means of setting rules that can protect consumers without hampering innovation. Nevertheless, self-regulatory efforts are generally better than prescriptive legislation to keep pace with evolving technologies. One recent example of this is the self-regulatory program for online behavioral advertising, which has advanced both transparency and consumer choice. Among other things, this program includes a standard icon that is prominently displayed in or next to online ads. By clicking on the icon, consumers can access information about the delivery of the ad and choose to opt out from receiving behavioral advertising. Finally, the fourth element is consumer education. In order for all of these elements to work, consumers need to understand the protections and tools available and the practices of companies with which they're interacting. That's why, in addition to providing information ourselves, we've also partnered with consumer advocates and government agencies to develop educational materials on consumer privacy and data security. In conclusion, addressing consumer privacy expectations requires the collaborative effort of individual companies, industry groups, consumer and privacy advocates, government, and consumers themselves. We must work together to meet these challenges without hindering innovation. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Meyer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bono Mack and Ranking Member Butterfield and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Scott Meyer. I'm the CEO and founder of Evidon, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about consumer expectations regarding online interest-based advertising and the important role that my company, Evidon, plays in meeting those expectations. We founded Evidon specifically to promote transparency, consumer control, and accountability across the online advertising ecosystem. Our technology is at the heart of the industry self-regulatory program, which is designed to give consumers greater control, transparency, and understanding of interest-based or behavioral ads. The core component of the program is the display of a distinct advertising option icon on interest-based ads and on websites where data is collected and used. Our platform, which is called Evidon Inform, is a leading example of privacy by design in the actual real world. It displays the advertising option icon in ads and on web pages. When consumers click on the icon, they can easily find out more information about the ad. This includes information about the companies who are involved in delivering the ad to them, as well as the all-important ability to opt out. I've brought some slides with me today, which are on the screens and are also in my written testimony. So if I could have the first slide, please, so you can see the platform in action. Here you can see an ad with the advertising option icon, along with the text ad choices in the upper left-hand corner. You might also see the same icon in the bottom of a web page. When consumers click on the icon, an overlay window appears with more information and the links you see displayed here on the next slide. In the 12 months since the launch of the advertising option icon program, Evidon has delivered over 85 billion of these in-ad notices through our platform. We currently provide notice in nearly 20 billion online ads each month, and on an average day, ads with Evidon-powered notice reach more than 80 million U.S. Internet users. One click on the more information and opt-out options on the slide takes you to the next page, which is the Evidon webpage shown here. And on this page, consumers can see which companies have been involved in the data collection and use, and they have the ability to find out more, as well as, importantly, to opt out. Evidon Inform also provides reporting to the companies to show them how consumers have interacted with this platform, and those reports are endorsed as a standard method for providing evidence of compliance with the industry's self-regulatory program. Though Evidon itself does not collect any consumer information, our anonymous logs show that the advertising option icon has been clicked 4.5 million times since the launch of the program. That's resulted in 730,000 opt-out requests being sent through the Evidon platform alone. In 2010, we commissioned a study by Millward Brown to better understand what consumers want and what they expect when they click on the icon. We found that 76% of consumers who clicked on the icon and interacted with the Evidon notice experience that you see here wanted to see all of the companies involved in targeting ads to them and find out more information. We also found that this was good for business, that 67% of consumers, when they went through the Evidon notice experience, felt more positive and in greater control of their advertising and felt more positive towards the brands that were involved in these ads. Together, these metrics support the proposition that consumers want more than a simple on or off switch, and they want substantive notice and control regarding the companies responsible for targeting the ads to them. Finally, if I could go to the next slide. In addition to implementing the advertising option icon, we've led the way with the creation of the Open Data Partnership. Open Data's key feature is the preference manager you see here and in my written testimony, which enables consumers to see and edit the information that companies have collected about them, as well as the all-important ability to opt out. The metrics I've laid out today and more fully developed in my testimony reflect an order of magnitude shift in the availability of how information is used and collected and the choices that consumers are able to make. This is important because the information is no longer buried in privacy policies. Now it's presented to the consumer in clear, specific, and easily understood ways directly at the point of engagement. And ultimately, the success of this program should be judged by the degree to which these access tools are produced in a credible fashion and the extent to which these tools are offered to the consumer, and not simply the rate at which consumers opt out. One last point I'll make is that this hearing is all about consumer expectations. The one thing I think everyone here can agree on is that consumers have come to expect free online content. The targeted advertising that we're talking about today plays an essential role in supporting the vibrant, free, and open internet that consumers have come to expect and to enjoy. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Ms. Woolley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And please make sure your microphone is on and close to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ranking Member Butterfield and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Linda Woolley, and I'm Executive Vice President of Washington Operations for the Direct Marketing Association, a global trade association of thousands of businesses and nonprofit organizations that use and support multi-channel direct marketing tools and techniques. Today, however, I'm pleased to testify on behalf of the Digital Advertising Alliance, known as DAA, and to report to the subcommittee on the substantial progress of our self-regulatory program for online behavioral advertising. The program, which you've heard about from previous witnesses, builds on a long tradition of successful self-regulation in marketing and advertising and provides transparency and control so that consumers can exercise their individual choices regarding online behavioral advertising. It is appropriate that the subcommittee is devoting a series of hearings to online issues because it is impossible to overstate the economic importance of the internet today. I think one of your members, I think Mr. Butterfield actually mentioned earlier that the online behavioral advertising industry in this year alone represents a $30 billion economy, and that's growing. Advertising helps to fuel the internet economic engine. According to a new report from the Direct Marketing Association, based on the results of the first half of this year, expenditures in 2011 on online marketing in the United States are expected to total over $30 billion. These revenues support e-commerce and subsidize a rich variety of content and services that consumers and businesses rely upon and value. Behavioral or interest-based advertising is an essential form of online advertising. It delivers content to consumers based on interests that are inferred from data about online activities. Consumers are likely to find interest-based advertisements much more relevant than the random messages that they would otherwise receive. And advertisers and publishers also derive great value from personally identifiable information. Nevertheless, the advertising industry recognizes and respects that some consumers prefer not to refer. Trade Commission endorsed. Retroactive material changes and enforcement. Our regulatory principles are, self-regulatory principles are to the complex and ever-evolving online advertising ecosystem. More importantly, they represent consensus in the online advertising industry. Since
risks are out there. And we all drive cars, but we're not all mechanics. Likewise, consumers are on the internet, but they're not all technical experts. This is not a surprise to any of us. It's so frustrating when we get consumer phone calls and there's a solution for them, but they don't know about it. And we talk to them about it, but that's just one consumer that we've helped. There are millions and millions of consumers in this particular boat. How do we help all of these consumers who are unaware of these technical risks that we face online? It's a very difficult challenge, but the one thing that surveys are very clear on is that consumers are completely almost unaware of the risks they face. It would be very challenging for a consumer to simply keep up with everything that's going on between a tracking cookie and this and that. But secondly, as Alessandro has talked about, consumers do not understand the privacy trade-offs that they're looking at when they're looking at privacy policies and icons. This is by pretty much anything. This is a human nature problem. So a consumer goes to a website, they see a privacy policy, or they see a seal or an icon. What do they think? They think that their information is not collected, that their information is not sold, bartered, etc. This is simply not usually the case, but this is what consumers believe. This is a fundamental perception issue that's going to need to shift for consumers to be able to take adequate protective actions for themselves. So, as a result of these structural imbalances on the web, we support legislation that will protect consumers. However, the reality check is that we don't see any likelihood of that happening in the near future. So what's a consumer to do? What's to happen now? What are we faced with here? I think that what we need to do is look at self-regulation. If self-regulation is going to be the way forward, we need to reform it. There are a lot of structural issues with self-regulation today. Self-regulation today bears many of the self-regulatory efforts for privacy in the past have also shared. I've included a checklist of 15 items that a credible self-regulatory regime should have. Among these include greater transparency, a defined and permanent role for consumers, a composition of a board, a governing board that includes a majority of consumer involvement. All of these things would go far to improve the current self-regulatory schemes in play today. So we advocate for greatly improved and reformed self-regulation. I think it's an important thing to look at. The second thing is that we think that there needs to be a broader scope of discussion. It's very frustrating for me when I hear discussions about online advertising, because when we get calls from consumers, they're not talking about what ads they've been shown, not usually, it's pretty rare. They're talking about their health data that's been used against them, that an employer has found. They're talking about when they've gone to a website, they've signed up for a survey, and then they found out later that that information was sold because they just didn't read the privacy policy. We've got to look at the broader array of privacy issues. Some of these issues do include advertising because advertisings are part of the collection mechanism online. That's the role we need to look at. So when we're talking about opt-outs, it's great that there's so much more activity with opt-out and that the opt-out is better. We support that, and I think it's terrific. It is. It really is. It's much, much better than it was even 2 years ago. But what are consumers getting the right to opt out of? Are they getting the right to opt out of tracking or being shown an ad? We need to deliver opt-outs that confer fundamental choices to consumers, like opting out of tracking. So this is what we think is really important to focus on. And then just a quick word. Many of the self-regulatory regimes today focus on very narrow aspects of online privacy. So for example, if a consumer with a health condition was to go to a website to research AIDS or cancer or Alzheimer's for an aging parent, that consumer's information can be tracked and then used in ways that may be counter to their expectations. This is exactly the kind of thing that we need to work with. Does it harm a person to be shown an ad about Alzheimer's? That is debatable. In some cases, I think young teen girls being showed weight loss ads, that can be harmful. But other, a red car or a blue car, I'm not so worried about that. I am worried about the collection of the data, the tracking, and the reuse. So that's my statement, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon, and now I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning, and I'd like to start with Mr. Meyer. In your testimony, you state that since October 2010, your icon has been featured in over 85 billion ads, that consumers have clicked the icon 4.5 million times, and that consumers have submitted 730,000 opt-out requests. That's not a real high success rate, I would think. On your slide, I noticed the icon, and I toured into it a little while ago, and they had some pretty fantastic technology that tracked the eyeballs as they followed around the screen. What kind of testing did you do of your icon and clicking on that icon? Is that evident enough for the consumers, or is this not quite there yet as being as obvious to consumers as it could be?
Sure. So I think that we do a lot of testing. And the challenge with the size of the icon in the ad is that we're working with a small amount of real estate, and we have to balance the notification about online tracking with the ability for the ad to actually perform. And we have to enable marketers to continue to meet their needs. The icon was created through a cross-industry and cross-functional group that included academics and industry, and it was tested reasonably well. And very importantly, I'd end with the icon is not an opt-out mechanism. The icon is an education mechanism. One of the important features is the ability to opt out. And in terms of the performance rates, in terms of the clicks relative to the performance of overall online advertising, it's very consistent. General online advertising ads click rates generally are under 1% anyhow.
Can you, and let me clarify a little bit about what I'm saying about the success rate of that, whether that's driven by your design or whether it's driven by consumer expectations is I think, the whole session, persistent, flash cookie, super cookie, and if there is absolutely no technological answer on the horizon that could wipe all of those things out.
So the technological answers exist today for almost all the different types of cookies.
Even a super cookie?
Super cookies are the one piece that we at Evidon think should not be used for any form of online advertising. That's not what they're designed for. We don't think there's any legitimate purpose in online advertising for a super cookie. All the other forms of cookies that you allude to, that you mentioned, are easily accessible. The most basic are HTML cookies that are used for what are called session and permanent cookies, and those can be erased through the opt-out mechanism that we provide. We also own and operate a service called Ghostery, which is one of the most popular privacy protection tools for consumers. More than 4 million people have downloaded it. That completely blocks advertising. It essentially creates the on-off switch that is envisioned by Do Not Track.
So Ghostery is a lot stronger than if I just go into my own browser and I hit delete cookies?
That's true.
Okay. If I can go to Ms. Lawler, thank you for your testimony. And for me, something that has struck me over all of these years is the migration, what the content industry has been faced with, that it's impossible to compete against free. And I know that Intuit has tried, they have now mint.com, so you have both the Quicken and the Mint. Can you explain the consumer understanding, the difference? Are they enjoying the free program better? Are they migrating to free because they're getting some trade-offs? Can you explain briefly your experiences with the two?
Yes. So let me start and say there's Quicken is actually our flagship product. That's where Intuit started nearly 30 years ago. And so that is downloadable software or CD-based software that you run on your desktop. So you pay for that. I think what you're asking is where the business model goes and where consumers are going is to an online-based service. And in the case of Mint.com, Mint is free, so you're not paying for that. You can actually use some of the tools on Mint without even signing up for it. When you go to the Mint page, it's very simple, easy, clear to understand what the value is, what you can do in terms of managing your budget, tracking expenses. How that gets paid for is through the option for you to get offers.
But my question specifically is, are you finding that consumers are going towards the free site rather than either the download or you buy the CD-ROM
They're moving over time. I don't have the specific numbers with me. I'd be happy to go find that information for you and bring it back to the committee at a later date. What we're finding is that there's a gradual move to online. Some of that is technology-based, so those who are more comfortable with mobile technologies. It's also somewhat generational, so as we see young people more comfortable with using free online services or any online service, there's definitely a trend towards online, but it's very slow and gradual, so small percentages over the years.
All right, thank you. My time has expired. Mr. Towns, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me begin with you, Ms. Dixon. I understand that there was a study in California of Internet users, and of course, could you please talk about that just for a moment in terms of what happened? And
Yes, this was, I believe you're referring to the Chris Hoofnagel and Jennifer King study that studied.
2008?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
It was a groundbreaking study, and what they did is they went and surveyed online users and asked them what they perceived when they saw privacy policies online. And the findings were remarkable because the misperceptions were just profound. So, for example, a majority of consumers, when they saw a privacy policy, believed that that meant that the site would not collect information about them, even collect. Users also believed that they would have the right to sue if the site did things with their data that they did not want. And these were just among a few of the many misperceptions that consumers had about privacy policies when they saw them. And consumers, very few consumers understood that when, for example, they opted out, there were questions about, various cookies and whatnot. Consumers just did not understand that when they opted out with an opt-out cookie, that it didn't mean that they were not going to be tracked. It just meant that they were not going to be given display ads based on tracking. So there was a profound, deep, serious misunderstanding and misperception of what privacy policies actually mean when they're on a site.
Right. Thank you very much. Dr. Acquisi? Okay, thank you. Do you think privacy policies serve any useful purpose for the consumers?
They do. I see them as necessary, not sufficient conditions, in the sense that we do need privacy policies because we need to inform and educate the consumers. They are not sufficient, however, because of the type of challenges I was describing in my testimony.
Excuse me, 1 second, if the gentleman will suspend. I'm asked to notify you all that there are protesters in the hallway. We don't expect it to get out of hand, but if it does, please exit that door. So.
You don't have to worry about it. I'm here.
And
I'm here. Don't worry about it.
There you go. I feel so comfortable now. Thank you. Please continue.
Yes, you may continue.
So the challenges I was mentioning, just to summarize, are one, a problem of, economists call it boundary rationality. We don't have unlimited time to think about all the possible consequences. Even if we read a policy, we may not think through what it really implies. Some policies are written in ways which are not easily understood. One study a few years ago reported that half of privacy policies on the internet are not understood by about 60% of internet users. Plus there is also this additional challenge that if we take this approach seriously, and we really believe that users who have to read privacy policies to know what happens to their data, the opportunity cost is enormous.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hintz, I've followed your company in terms of, I know you have a privacy officer. Basically, what is the role of that privacy officer?
Well, we have a number of people at Microsoft focused on privacy. We've got our Chief Privacy Officer who's responsible for the overall governance of privacy programs within Microsoft, and that includes training for our employees, whether they're developers or marketers or human resources folks. It includes the development of our standards and guidelines that we provide around marketing, around product development, et cetera. It includes building in privacy checkpoints and privacy training and privacy standards into our business processes. So our Chief Privacy Officer oversees all of that. He also oversees not necessarily direct reporting relationships, but kind of a dotted line relationship to all the people in Microsoft who are focused on privacy. And we have over 40 full-time people focused on privacy and another 400 who have it as a defined part of their job, and those people are embedded in every business.
Do more harm than good. What can we do to encourage other companies to consider privacy issues very carefully?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, for multiple entities in protecting have represented on the panel here today, and I think individual companies privacy practices. We've made those internal standards that I talked about for developing products and services and building privacy protections into those. We've made those publicly available so that other companies can see them and take advantage of the work that we've done over the years in developing those. Privacy advocates clearly have a role in helping to educate consumers and bring to the attention issues that come up and nudging industry in appropriate ways to do the right thing. And government has a role through enforcement when people are breaking existing laws, through using your own bully pulpit to educate your constituents, and playing the oversight role that this committee has done so well for so many years.
Thank you so much, and we salute you and your company. Yes.
Gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes Ms. Blackburn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Meyer, I want to come to you. I know that Evadon is partnering with Akamai. Am I saying that correctly? Yes. There was a Wall Street Journal, trillions of interactions, 1 trillion interactions a day. So let's talk about the consumer. Now, with your platform, tell me what this means for the consumer. How does it empower them? How does it allow them to continue to protect or have the ability to protect what I term the virtual you, their presence online? So just in about 15, 20 seconds, can you give me that synopsis?
I'll do my best. So Akamai powers more than 1 trillion internet transactions every day. The Evadon technology, which you saw in my slides and in my testimony, will now be built directly into that platform, which will take the process of website operators of all forms. It'll take the process of complying with the program and giving consumers that view into their virtual you. It will take what is now a reasonably complex legal and technical process, and it will simplify it to literally a few clicks and a short
Okay, so you're saying your ability is simplicity and transparency and access.
Precisely.
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That is the goal of us and Akamai getting together for this.
All right, that's what I wanted to know. I was unclear. You know, the B2B is fine, but I want to know what you're going to do for the consumer, how they're going to be able to protect their privacy. Ms. Woolley, I want to ask you pretty much the same thing. Do you think that industry can do a better job than government in addressing these privacy concerns that you all have rolled out with the Ad Choice campaign?
Yeah, I absolutely think that industry can do a better job than government. The main reason is that we are nimble. And
Please make sure your microphone is on.
Is that on now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are nimble and we can move quickly. We've rolled out this program in a year, and we are now rolling out further iterations of the program, which include migration of that icon overseas and migration of that icon to mobile devices. To do that in less than a year is something that government could not do.
Okay, and in your testimony, you mentioned protecting data in terms of the cost to jobs, cost to the economy. Would you just elaborate on that just a tiny bit?
Sure. If there have been several studies that show that if the United States were to adopt a privacy regime along the lines of what Europe has adopted, that the cost
do not track.
Do not track,
Yeah.
and do not use cookies, the cost to our economy would be about $33 billion a year.
Okay, thank you. I have a series of yes and no questions that I wanted to go through. So if you all will listen, and then I'll have you raise your hand for yes and your hand for no. Okay, do you believe a government-mandated do not track, as the FTC has endorsed, goes too far and would be too much to address the privacy problem? Yes, if you believe do not track it goes too far, raise your hands. Okay, so I've got 4 on that and no. 1 no, and the rest abstain. So you're going to be a no too. All right. Like decisiveness here. Okay. Second question. Do you believe that government regulations on commercial use of de-identified metadata or anonymous data sets pose significant to the First Amendment? So do you believe that government regulations on commercial uses of de-identified metadata or anonymous data sets pose significant challenges to the First Amendment? Yes? Okay, we've got 2 yeses. No? We've got 2 no's. The rest are thinking. All righty. Congress and the federal government in general have a low approval rating. We admit that. Yes or no? Do you think consumers, here's the question, okay? Yes or no?
Oh my goodness.
This is what I want to hear from you on. Do you think consumers trust government to know best how to protect their privacy through rules, mandates, legislation, or no? Do they trust the government to do it, or do they trust you? Yes, if they trust government. Just 2 of you would trust the government. No, they don't trust the government. They would trust industry. 1. Like these hands kind of waving out there. Okay, do you believe new privacy regulations could have an adverse impact on industry competition that would hinder smaller firms, some of the innovative firms? Yes. Do you believe new privacy regulations could have an adverse impact on industry competition that would hinder smaller firms, or no? Yes, if you believe it's going to have, got 2 on the yes side. No, it's not going to impact. 1 no. All righty. I'm going to let you off the hook because my time's expired. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentlelady, and now recognizes Mr. Lance for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you all. This is very interesting, and I have learned a great deal. To Ms. Lawler, do you know what percentage of your customers view and manipulate the privacy options that you offer them?
We have a couple of different ways that we approach privacy choices. If you think about the traditional choices that most companies have offered for the last several years, which would be in the marketing space, so around phone calls, email, snail mail, and so on. It's a fairly small percentage. I don't have all the numbers with me. I can tell you that in our email marketing, specifically, that our opt-out rates are at about the industry average. But I'd be happy to research that more with our IT organization.
And what is the industry average?
It's about 0.05 to 0.1. It depends upon the type of ad and the context.
Thank you. Thank you very much. To Professor Acquisti, your testimony includes an interesting point that I'm not sure has been raised before. You call it the paradox of control. In other words, the more privacy choices a consumer has, the more likely that consumer is to have a false sense of security. Does this argue against more granular controls, or if you would elaborate on your views on that?
It was indeed a paradoxical result. To explain it with an analogy, other studies have shown that when you ask people to wear seatbelts, some of them may start driving faster. It's a problem of overconfidence. You feel more protected, you end up taking more risk. So we believe that this is what's happening in the results we found. As you make consumers feel more in control, the ones deciding, with the agency of deciding whether or not to give personal information, which in a normative sense is a good thing, the unexpected consequence can be that this overconfidence can lead to the consumer taking more risk. And what I mean by more risk, and I have to be very careful with this, is compared to a condition, experimental condition, where there was no such feeling of control, the subjects in the condition we call control ended up revealing more sensitive information to more strangers.
And so how would you overcome that challenge?
Well, it's an issue of what kind of control do we give and whether control solves all the problems. So the results of the study suggest that merely giving granular control may not solve consumer decision-making problems if that control leads to bad decisions later on. It's not a statement about we should never give control, of course. It's about what type of control we give and whether by having given control do we feel that we have solved privacy problems. The results of the experiment suggest that the answer to the last question is no.
Thank you very much. To Mr. Hintz from Microsoft. You state that consumer attitudes to privacy can evolve over time. I'm sure that's true. Noting how consumers were originally hesitant to share photos and videos online, but now regularly do so. Have you seen any evidence where consumers are now evolving in the opposite direction to restrict the collection and sharing of their information online with commercial operators?
I'm not sure I can point to any particular statistics that would show that, but I certainly think that we see more of an awareness of privacy than we did a few years ago. You know, I agree with the comments that Ms. Dixon made, is that people don't always fully understand all of what's going on, and it's always a challenge to get. That's in large part due to the work of privacy advocates and many of the journalists. I mean, we've all seen the Wall Street Journal series of articles and other publications that have been focused on privacy. Whether that translates into you know, people making different choices, that's hard to quantify, and I'm not quite sure how we would do that. But we certainly see more people looking at our privacy web pages now than we have in the past. And it's certainly something that we are cognizant of and want to make sure that we're responsive to those concerns.
Thank you very much. My thanks to the panel. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gonzalez for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I apologize for not being here for the testimony. I had the opportunity, though, to review written statements that were submitted. Again, I wish I could have been here for the testimony, because it is incredibly important to be here today and to share your viewpoints and your own experiences. My first observation, of course, is information gathering, dissemination, protection of same, and so on, and how important that is to different industries. So I guess I want to acknowledge that in this informational age, and how we market, how we promote products and services in our system is incredibly important, and things have been revolutionized. And the fact that you can now target audiences, which I think is a tremendous advantage and makes a more effective way for those individuals in this country that have different business enterprises to reach their customers. And you know what happens when we reach customers, and that means we, in fact, do create wealth and we create jobs in this country. So I want to acknowledge the importance of information gathering, what it means, and that many of the services that are provided today, as we say, free, really constitute a trade. You will receive some sort of service through the internet, one way or another, in return for allowing the person that's providing you this service or benefit the opportunity to basically establish some sort of consumer DNA. And that's the world that we live in. And I think, as I came in, one of the things that Mr. Is it Hinsey or Hintz? Hinsey was pointing out is really whether the consumer is aware of the information that they are providing and its use. And we've struggled with this in the past, even years ago when I was on financial services, as to what an affiliate could share. But what it comes down to, Mr. Hinsey, I was reading your testimony, and it's very interesting because you have different points. But one of them, of course, is technological tools. And that is that you, with Microsoft, could provide the consumer and the user of the internet with the ability to basically not allow any kind of tracking to establish this consumer identity or DNA. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And in the testimony, I briefly mentioned the features we built into Internet Explorer 9 in response to the call for do not tracking mechanisms that are browser-based. And if I could expand on that just slightly. What Internet Explorer 9 does with the tracking protection feature is that it allows consumers to turn on this feature and import any tracking protection list that they want, which would be a list of third-party sites that may be tracking individuals across the internet. And when you turn this on, it blocks those connections to those third parties. So for example, if you went to a major news site and there were 10 third parties providing content on that site, which is not an uncommon scenario. A couple of them may be advertising networks, one may be a stock ticker, one may be an embedded video, all coming from different sites. Well, if one or more of those sites were listed on a tracking protection list that the user had installed through this feature, that call just wouldn't be made. And that would cut off any ability for that third party to collect any information because it's blocking the content coming down and it's blocking any other connection going back up to that party. So that's the nice thing about that is it's technology neutral. It doesn't matter if they're tracking through a cookie or through logging IP addresses or even one of these super cookie mechanisms. The connection just isn't made. And so that's kind of a sledgehammer approach. It blocks the content too, but it's very effective. In contrast to some of the other do not track mechanisms that have been mentioned during the opening statement of Ms. Bono-Mack, she mentioned that the Mozilla approach sends a signal to the receiving website that says do not track. Understanding about what a website is supposed to do in response to that signal. Now we're working with the World Wide Web Consortium and with Mozilla and with privacy advocates to try to provide some definition around that so that there's additional choices for consumers, which we support. But in the interim, the approach that we've taken is effective and doesn't rely on the receiving third party to make any choices or decisions because they're
technology has created, if we want to say it's the dilemma or the challenge, so technology will be the answer. And I only have a few seconds, but let me get this straight. What you're able to provide the internet user is going to be where they select the third-party sites. This is not going to be a generic or universal application where I, Charlie Gonzalez, I could just have this feature and I don't have to identify a particular third party. It would just be all-encompassing. It doesn't matter what contact or who I contact or who I connect with. I wouldn't have the ability to have that feature. It's all contingent on identifying the third-party site.
Well, you can download a list from an entity you trust. A privacy advocacy organization could publish a tracking protection list. Any organization can publish one. You could create one yourself, but as you mentioned, you would have to know. But you can rely on an organization to do that. And there are some out there that are very comprehensive. They have many third parties on there that if you import that, it would just block those third parties. So you don't have to do sort of that legwork yourself. You can rely on a trusted entity that you would rely on.
Well, you're on the right track. And again, I just want, Madam Chair, could you have a few, some extra seconds? I think is it Woolley?
We'll be doing a second round if we can.
Oh, okay. I think we're going to have a second round, so if you can just wait my turn again. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Guthrie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here today. Just a couple of questions as we move forward. You know, advertising has always been about behavior. All of us are behavior advertisers. I want to send pieces of mail to people who vote. So we always get the voter rolls out and we go through. And so I know it's a public record, but it's private behavior that's and see. But what we have to do is try to balance now that things are in hyper mode with the technology. If you make a phone call, somebody knows where you're. But the question is, we got to try to balance. I know that Bing, Yahoo, Google, any search engine wants to outdo the other one. They want to be faster, better, because they want me to go to it. Because the more people that go to it, the more valuable their advertising space is. Just like if I want to watch a Kentucky basketball game for free, I've got to go through they got to take a break every 8 minutes to show a commercial so I can watch it for free. And that's happening on the internet. The difference is they can individualize it, I guess. So I guess my point is, and I guess Dr. Akisti, I think you said it correctly, since you studied this, and you said that you didn't think it would affect the economic behavior of this. We talked about $33 billion of job loss. Ms. Blackburn asked a question. You said you didn't think it would affect. If the search engines aren't getting the revenue from the advertising that let me to use it for free, and they're competing against each other to make it better, so it's far better than it was a year ago, what's going to drive that innovation if the advertising dollars are, if we follow the European model, what's going to drive the innovation or continue it to be free to me? Or am I going to have to start paying for it like when we did debit cards? We took a vote here to change the debit card. Now the people who voted for it are complaining about the fact banks are charging for it. So, I mean, that's the question I want to ask. How's it not going to affect it? How's it going to work economically if we do the European-style system?
Definitely. So to clarify, the point I was making in the testimony was not that there will be no effects, but rather I was pointing out that the so-called free goods we get online are free only if you don't consider the fact that we end up paying them as consumers through a different channel as we purchase the goods which are offered online.
Like watching a sports game on television for free. You've got to sit through the commercial to watch it.
Indeed. That was the point I was trying to make.
Or you can do pay-per-view and watch it. You could do pay-per-view and watch it without commercials. But a lot of us don't want to pay for a search engine. We just want it. And so who's going to pay for it if we don't do it in, is the model that you'd have to pay individually, like you'd have to sign up for a search engine, like $10 a month or something, as opposed to getting it for free?
Right, so...
Then how's it going to work if we don't have advertising?
Right, so actually, if I may, the alternative, I don't believe, is between no advertising and advertising. First of all, this is a parenthesis, free content existed even before the age of behavioral advertising. And in fact, we don't know exactly how much of the free content now available online is due to behavioral advertising versus quote-unquote more traditional advertising.
I only have a minute and a half, so maybe we can catch in the second round. I wanted to ask Ms. Dixon, I have an uncle, a great uncle, who had early onset Alzheimer's, died in his 50s. I'm 47 now. So if I go online, maybe I don't know this, and say early onset Alzheimer's, what do I need to fear that I don't know? Because if I Google that right now, what could happen? Because you're saying what would happen if I went and search engine that? What can happen to me that I don't know about?
Well, in a search engine, I don't think you have so much trouble because most of those ads are contextual and it's just really not that big of a deal. Maybe you'll find a rogue actor, advertiser who's kind of a low-hanging fruit and out of the ballpark and, not playing by the rules. But in general, where you really need to be concerned is when you go to a couple of different things. There's three scenarios. One, you go to a scammy site that's just built based on fear, and someone slapped up a website, and there's all sorts of third parties on it, and they're just gathering up any information you're filling into a form, and they're selling it on a direct marketing list. That happens more often than I even want to describe. It's a terrible thing when it happens to anyone. That's what you need to fear. The second thing would be if you go to, let's say, a very legitimate website. It's a legitimate business. There are some very large websites that you could go to that focus on health and healthcare and type in your query. What can happen is that you simply begin to see advertisements that are focused on early Alzheimer's. That's really not that big of an outcome in my book. That doesn't bother me that much. What bothers me more is that there may be a number of third-party entities on that page. It could be advertisers. It could be other kinds of third parties. It could be Facebook. It could be all sorts of different third parties now in this new kind of digital.
Well, what can they do to me? I'm about out of time.
Well, that's the thing. What they can do is they can take that information that you've given and then merge it with other information, and that becomes a part of a profile about you or the computer you're using. And if you've registered for the site, it becomes part of your profile.
And somebody would use that to do what? That would be negative.
They can sell it. They can sell it outright, and it happens every day.
So somebody could say he must have Alzheimer's because you Googled that?
Or he's interested in Alzheimer's information.
And that's bad. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I don't.
Or has Alzheimer's, correct. Yes.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I think we're all well aware that a lot of free content available on the internet is made possible by advertising. All types of advertising, not just behaviorally targeted advertising. I think consumers understand that they get free content thanks to the ads that surround that content. But what they often don't understand is that the spaces where those ads are placed might sometimes be watching them. As one privacy expert who has looked at consumer attitudes and behavior regarding privacy has put it, consumers accept the idea that ads support free internet content, but do not expect data to be part of that exchange. Many in the internet tracking industry argue that steps to empower consumers to decide for themselves whether they want to allow tracking of their online activity will kill free internet content. I, for one, do not buy this argument. I don't buy it because reported advertising revenue numbers don't support it. The last figure that we have been able to track showed that revenue from behaviorally targeted ads was $925 million in 2009. That's almost $1 billion. This figure was reported in a March 2010 marketing industry blog post. This is the only easily accessible piece of information that we have been able to find that specifically breaks out revenue from these ads. In 2009, overall revenue from every type of internet advertising was almost $23 billion. Now, the first question is open to anyone who wishes to respond. Can any of you provide more recent figures that clearly break out the amount spent on behaviorally targeted ads last year, not on display advertising generally or all online advertising, but specifically on behaviorally targeted ads? Do any of you have any data that all right? As I used to say when I was a judge, let the record show that no one responded. I'm sorry, who was? Yes,
Well,
Ms. Wiley.
let me
Yes.
just respond that
Yes.
according to the FTC's definition of what online behavioral advertising is, one of our partner trade associations in the DAA, the Internet Advertising Bureau, found that over 80% of the ads that are delivered are OBA, or online behavioral advertising. And actually, I think, sir, the revenue number is significantly higher than the blog post that you cited. DMA has done several studies, more recent than 2009, with Global Insight, and I think the number is actually substantially higher.
Congressman Butterfield, I'd just like to add to that, the number, I can follow up with you, we get you the specific estimates, but it's in the several billion dollars. And the other important thing to think about, there's two other important points. The first one is the definition of what is behavioral, and that's why a legislative approach could be so dangerous, because it could be anywhere from a reasonably small percentage to a number as high as 70 to 80%. And that's the first piece. And the second one is that this is the fastest growing part of the online advertising industry. So if you break out the different pieces, the data-driven behavior advertising is growing at the fastest rate inside an overall very fast-growing industry, along with video advertising.
I guess the one other point that I would like to make here, too, is that there was a conversation about targeting individuals, and I represent the Direct Marketing Association. Targeting individuals is not a new phenomenon. It's something the Direct Marketing Association is close to 100 years old, so that is something that's gone on for close to 100 years. And direct marketing methods and techniques are part of the curriculum of almost every university that has a direct marketing program. So these are actual techniques and methodologies that are taught in university. So the thing that the internet has done is make the process faster and more nimble. But the techniques and the methods are not new.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair recognizes Mr. Kinzinger for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for coming out and participating. I'll be the first to say that I think government needs to put an end to needless regulations that do little to protect the consumer or protect jobs. but I'm not convinced personally that do not track legislation is the right approach. I do have some serious concerns that without privacy protection, consumers could lose confidence in the online free market. Each of you represents responsible companies that are working to inform consumers of their privacy choices online. But in the end, you don't represent the bad actors that could potentially come and undermine your efforts. So my first question is to all of you, and we can do the hand raise thing. You all have basically answered this, but I just want to see for myself. Do you think the committee should pass privacy legislation to ensure the bad actors don't undermine your effort? Who's a yes on that? Okay, and who's a no? Okay, so 2 no's. Okay. I'm also deeply concerned by what a Stanford study that appeared in the National Journal yesterday said. The study shows that websites are unknowingly leaking email addresses, usernames, and other personal information to ad networks. If consumers had the choice and were aware of this transfer of personal data, I don't believe the mass majority of consumers would support websites selling this personal information to outside parties. Should consumers be required to opt in to allow websites to share this personal information? And let me also expand on that. I'm not talking about a 30-page privacy statement that nobody reads. I don't think I've ever read a 30-page privacy statement in my life. Something that should clearly be presented before it's being shared. So should opt-in be a requirement? I guess we can start right to left.
Complicated question. But
It is a complicated.
it's really complicated.
Well, let's try to keep it very short if we can. So, Ms. Dixon, if you want to.
Yeah. It's a challenging question to answer in a black and white manner. If there's a first-party relationship, that's one thing. But if we're using fair definitions of first party, fine. Third party, that's a whole different thing. It really third party.
All right, Doctor? Sir?
I actually agree exactly with this statement.
Okay. Anybody?
I have an opinion. And it is a complicated question. The wonderful thing about the icon is that it, which is over there, I think you were not in the room when I mentioned that, is that it gives consumers the choice about opting out of those third parties who are on a site,
Right.
And not allowing collection and use of their data. And it's easy, it's transparent, and it's ubiquitous at this point. You can't be on the internet without seeing the icon.
You're more of an opt-out versus an opt-in.
Well, there are lots of reasons that the Stanford, and I don't even want to call it a study. I mean, it was the musings of a graduate student. It was not peer-reviewed. There was no methodology. So that,
All right.
that's all it was. And there are
I only
lots
have a
of
couple
great
minutes
reputable
left.
studies out there, but that was not one of them.
Right.
As my colleague from Microsoft mentioned earlier, there are lots and lots of reasons why third parties are on websites. Some of them are there to serve ads. Some of them are there to collect information.
Gotcha.
But others are there to deliver content, like sports scores and stock
Right.
scores. And so if you're absolutely blocking third, I mean, we go to CNN.com, we know
Okay.
what we want, and if I have to permit every single one of them, I don't know what I don't know.
Thanks. Any of the other three you guys have any
I'd like
input?
to just go back.
Go ahead.
I'd like to go back to something you said about do not track and the need for legislation. The reason I said no is because it already exists in the form of the Federal Trade Commission Act.
Okay.
Just this morning, the Federal Trade Commission settled with a company for a deceptive trade practice. And the situation you describe tends to be firmly in line with those deceptive trade practices, and that's the
All
right
right.
role of government.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you guys off because I got one more question. I have an update from a major telecom provider which says they're going to start sharing user information with local companies based on their physical address on an opt-out. They're also going to start recording and sharing URLs of websites visited with actual physical location of that user's wireless device. It does say there will be no information that's personally identifiable, but after seeing the study, which you call into question, but I have some interest in, I'm not sure that it's even possible. Should sharing a user's geolocation data with ad networks require a clear, concise opt-in from the consumer? Let's go. If we go to the over, you three have anything first, and then we can go back. To
Sure, I'm happy to address that. We operate a phone operating system as well as many of our other things, in addition to our ad business. And our approach has been that we believe that the collection of precise geolocation information should require an affirmative consent on behalf of the user.
Okay. Does anybody disagree with that?
Well, the one thing I do want to say is that if information as you're describing it right here is aggregated, that geolocation that's aggregated and not specific to an individual could be used for all sorts of business, not
We're talking about marrying that with a specific individual, though, in this case. So, but thank you all for your generosity, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair recognizes Mr. Dingle for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I commend you for this hearing. These questions are yes or no questions. To all witnesses, starting at your left and rather at your right and at my left, is it your understanding that interest-based advertising supports much of the free content of the internet? Yes or no? Beginning with Ms. Lawler.
Yes.
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 No disagreement. Okay. Further, is it your understanding that the consumers expect much of the content they consume online to be free? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 So no disagreement on that. Good. Now
not always.
again to all witnesses. Do you believe that all consumers have the same view of interest-based advertising? Yes or no?
No.
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 Ma'am?
No.
No.
Okay, so we have agreement there. To all witnesses, is it fair to say that imposing rigid privacy requirements on interest-based advertising would have a drastic effect on the way consumers currently experience the internet? Yes or no? Again, if you please, Ms. Lawler.
Can you ask the question again, please?
Okay, I'll give it again. Is it fair to say that when then imposing rigid privacy requirements on interest-based advertising would have a drastic effect on the way consumers currently experience the internet? Yes or no?
I'm going to say probably.
Okay. Sir?
I know you asked for yes, no, but I think it depends what you mean by rigid. We think that can be some baseline privacy requirements that are perfectly consistent with the business models and innovation that we're talking about today.
Now, I will not object to any of you panel members giving additional response for the purposes of the record, because that's fair to you. Mr. Meyer?
I would agree with Mr. Hensey that it depends on the level of the rigidness, but the potential for it having a negative impact is unnecessarily high, in my opinion.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I have to give you the lawyer answer too, which is it depends, because I think that our program imposes very rigid requirements, and I think that the way that we've done it does not adversely affect the internet.
Thank you. Our next two panel members, please.
Also, my answer is not necessarily.
Ma'am?
The answer is not necessarily. However, I'm not sure that that's the only thing we should be focusing on.
So I guess that's a maybe. To all witnesses, do you believe that the current industry efforts to protect consumer data privacy are sufficient? Yes or no? Please, Ms. Lawler.
Yes, but we can do more.
Mr. Hates?
It's hard. Generally, yes.
Okay. If you please, Mr. Meyer.
We're off to a very good start, but we need the support of, in particular, this committee and the Federal Trade Commission to accelerate the acceptance.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat the question? I didn't.
Well, do you believe that current industry efforts to protect consumer privacy are sufficient?
I believe that they're sufficient, but I also know that our program is evolving, so we have to have the ability to evolve and get stricter as times change.
Thank you. The last two panel members, please.
Unfortunately, not. But I believe there are industries, privacy-enhancing technologies, which could definitely help.
Ma'am?
At the current time, no. However, I believe that the efforts could be improved through self-regulatory reform, such as involving consumers, having independent bodies overseeing the efforts, and other things that would greatly add to the credibility.
Stop, but I have 1 minute and 3 seconds left. Do you believe that such efforts can be improved? Or do you believe that Congress should pass data privacy legislation?
We believe that there's a significant opportunity for businesses to come together and lead more and do more in a self-regulatory approach. If Congress were to act, it would need to be a principle-based approach that's flexible and nimble and is not overly prescriptive.
Mr. Assey?
I think current efforts can be improved, and they are being improved, and I think that there's also a role for baseline federal privacy legislation.
Mr. Meyer?
If there I don't think it's necessary, but if there were any type of legislation, it would need to provide safe harbor for existing programs.
Our next three panelists, please.
I do not think that legislation is necessary, and I think that our table includes many wonderful American companies, including GM, and I would invite everybody here to be part of that program because our table is open.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir?
I believe it can be improved, and legislation can foster the deployment of technologies based on public-private key encryption, which satisfy privacy and data sharing.
Ma'am, if you please.
Legislation will help, and improvement of the current regimes will help as well.
Thank you. Now, again, to all witnesses, I'm intrigued by the concept of do not track list. Is it advisable for the federal government to mandate a do not track solution that prevents people from being tracked by the multiple devices that they use to access the internet? Yes or no? Starting with you, Ms. Lawler.
We don't believe that it makes sense for the government to mandate a specific do not track approach. We think it needs to evolve in terms of tools and technology.
Thank you.
We agree with the comments of Ms. Lawler. The FTC has done a good job of encouraging industry to move forward, but the industry has responded in an effective way.
Legislation to mandate, legislative mandates for technology, we don't think are the right approach, especially because it would extinguish a very vibrant, competitive entrepreneurial market that provides these tools today that continue to evolve and compete with each other.
Thank you, ma'am.
People need education. They need to know what's going on. They need to be able to make their own choices.
If you please.
It may not be the ideal solution, but it's better than no solution.
Ma'am?
We support do not track as legislation.
Okay, I note I'm out of time. Madam Chairman, thank you for your courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. The chair recognizes Mr. Olson for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairwoman. And again, I want to welcome the witnesses and thank you for giving us your time and expertise. And just for the record, my neighbor's kids were not out in the lobby early this morning. They're still back home in Texas, as far as I can tell. And my first set of questions is going to be for you, Ms. Woolley, and I want to follow up on the line of questions from Ms. Blackburn from Tennessee about the economics of privacy. And I'm familiar with the Digital Advertising Alliance's effort to develop the advertising icon, so prominently displayed over here, which provides consumers with notice and choice about ads through behavioral targeting. Many of the big companies have adopted the icon, but as you know, small business drives job creation in our economy. So can you elaborate more on how you've made the icon available to our nation's small businesses for free?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. It's actually a great story. We've made the icon available for free. If you have less than $2 million of revenue that's derived from online behavioral advertising, you can get in your small business, you can get the icon for free. We also from the ad networks because their ads are now world as well. So it's actually a great program.
That's my feeling as well. I mean, would you say that the icon provides a competitive advantage to companies that adopt it? Or put another way, are companies competing for business based on privacy features?
Actually, that's very interesting. When we launched the icon, we did not anticipate it being a trust seal of sorts. We thought that it was really just a consumer notice and choice mechanism, but it's actually wound up being a trust seal, and companies are competing based on the fact that this is a symbol that consumers can see. They know that there are principles and enforcement behind it, and they wind up trusting that site much more than they would otherwise.
So it actually is becoming competitive and driving companies
Absolutely,
to be
it's
better.
become
Yes,
competitive.
ma'am. And finally, if you, in your testimony, you mentioned that one of the major benefits of industry self-regulation is its ability to respond quickly to changes in technology and business practices. And some have raised concerns that data collected for advertising purposes could be, hypothetically, used as a basis for health insurance or credit eligibility decisions. But we don't have any actual examples or cases of this happening. But DAA is still going to address these concerns and expand your guidelines to clarify these kinds of practices that would be prohibited. Can you elaborate more on that initiative?
Yes, sir. You actually have stolen a little bit of our thunder because in a couple of weeks we're actually making the announcement that we will, all the companies that comply with the DAA program will be prohibited from making, we call them eligibility decisions, any kind of decisions, eligibility decisions based on data that is our advertising and marketing data. So, you know, I know that the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission is fond of saying if you buy a deep fryer online, then you will be denied health insurance. And we want to make it abundantly clear that that kind of decision is not acceptable. It is not part of the program. If you do that and you are part of the program, you will be thrown out of the program and referred to the FTC.
Thank you for that question. I didn't mean to steal your thunder, and didn't get that. No,
well, thank you for doing it.
And that's not something I intend to do. And this final question, just for all witnesses, because of my time, I'll probably have to make a yes or no question. But it's my understanding that the FTC has received a very wide range of comments concerning consumer attitudes and behavior when it comes to privacy. My interpretations of this wide range of comments, there's no clear consensus. Some consumers feel more strongly than others about online privacy protections. And so my question for all of you, we're just starting to the left and work to the right there, is there any hard data you're aware of that demonstrates the level of discomfort or the percentage of consumers who are willing to forego the benefits of free content online in order to avoid being tracked? Yes or no, starting at the end with you, Ms. Lawler.
I don't have any specific information from our consumer or customer studies that would indicate that particular type of action.
It's hard to interpret a lot of the studies out there because, as Dr. Akisti pointed out, there's a discrepancy between what people say and what they do. And so you can find a lot of studies that say people are very concerned about privacy, and I believe there's something behind that. But in terms of the trade-offs, that's harder to quantify.
Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, we haven't seen that research. It's the same juxtaposition between what consumers say and what they do, but it's something that we're actually looking at Evidon right now.
Ms. Woolley?
People vote with their feet or with their pocketbooks, and I think it's accurate to say that people are concerned about privacy because they are. Sales on the internet have gone exponentially in the last 3 years, and people's new devices come out, people love them, they buy them, they download apps. They're very willing to adopt all of these new things as they come out. They love them. And we are very mindful of the fact that as an industry, we're the ones providing all these great and wonderful and engaging things to people, but we have to take into consideration their desire for privacy, and that is the main reason that we have created this entire program.
You've met my 14-year-old daughter. Mr.
The gentleman's time has expired, and there will be an opportunity for second round, but there's still other members needing to ask questions.
Yield back. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank the gentleman. And the chair recognizes Mr. Stearns for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me just compliment you. It's a great hearing, and I'm glad to have all these witnesses here. Ms. Woolley, let me say that I think that your logo and what you're doing is terrific, and I think it goes a long way towards this self-regulatory behavior and program, and we just got to educate the consumers what it means when they see your logo. And hitting that logo, when I look at your slides, it starts to move into a little complication. And had you thought about perhaps even simplifying it either further, or you think you're at the point where it's pretty well understood by consumers?
I don't think it's at the point where it's understood by consumers. We're actually in the fall going to be, later in the fall, going to be launching an education campaign just to get at that point. We really hope that over time consumers will look at this symbol and know exactly what it means, kind of the way consumers look at the recycling symbol. 15 years ago, nobody really knew what the recycling symbol was, and now they do.
Good housekeeping seal, which everybody recognizes is universally accepted.
Exactly. But to answer your question, though, about whether the program is where it needs to be, we launched this program. We are constantly looking for suggestions about evolving the program, making it more consumer friendly, and making it do what really all of you want it to do. So I welcome that input.
You know, when I look through your slides, it's almost as a consumer, I just want one big button. Can I opt out? And that's it, and it's done.
Well, if you go to, there's two ways that you can get to our opt-out. You can get to it from the icon that is on ads. The other way that you can get to it directly is if you go to www.aboutads.info. And if you go to that site, in the middle of the site is a huge check mark.
That's-
And it says for consumers. If you check on it, you can opt out right there.
And
with
if that
that huge
opt-out,
check
when
mark.
you do that, does that apply to all your companies, or does it apply?
The first thing that happens is you will see your computer churning away, and it will
Right.
tell you the ad networks that are operating on your browser on that. You can opt out of all of them if you want to. Immediately behind it is a screen that tells you all the ad networks that exist.
I got you.
And you can opt out of all of those if you want.
Well, I think it's a credit to what you're doing. You know, when you see the European Union's privacy policy, and then you see a lot of Latin America and a lot of Asian countries are stopped. India start to include a privacy policy adopted after the European Union. We're almost going to be sitting here with this self-regulatory type of operation compared to everybody else. Right. Do you feel that there's any federal baseline legislation that's needed at all for privacy?
Not at this time. You know, we've got some great privacy laws in the area of HIPAA and Gramm-Leach-Bliley, ECPA. They're
dealing with financial and dealing
exactly.
with healthcare.
You know, there are lots
so
of
you
great
don't think
privacy
there's any
laws.
other area that's more
I do not.
sensitive? Let me just start to the left here, just yes or no. Do you think there's any need for federal baseline legislation for any aspect of personal privacy on the internet? Just yes or no?
I need to say more than yes or no.
Just yes or no. I mean, if if you have to check off whether we need federal baseline legislation for any aspect of personal privacy on the internet.
Well, as a company that's already regulated by some of the laws just mentioned, if there were a federal baseline approach, we'd want to see something that's principle-based. So we think that there's a potential for an appropriate baseline.
Well, I can ask you
if
personally.
that came in place.
I have a bill, H.R. 1528, and Mr. Matheson, have you looked at that?
I'm sorry.
Privacy bill that Mr. Matheson and I both dropped?
Yes, I have looked at that.
Do you think there's anything in there that you think should be needed?
I would have to.
You won't offend me if you say no. It doesn't bother me at all. I have nothing tied to my legislation.
I think.
And I ask you if you think there's any federal baseline legislation. Yes or no?
Yes, we've been on record for a number of years.
I know. I thought you had. Go ahead, Mr. Meyer.
So we don't support any new baseline legislation, but having read your bill, the piece that we do like is the provision.
Okay, Ms. Wolf. Professor?
Yes, we do. Self-regulatory under pressure, and the recent
Yes, there needs to be some type
Correct.
of... Okay. Ms. Dixon, I assume you're a strong yes.
We would still like to see reforms of.
Let me ask this last question. Just much time. What benchmarks are needed for self-regulation? I mean, could you say from your experience what benchmarks are needed? Yes. Since you represent the Digital Alliance.
Thank you. Many people opt out. I think the right benchmark is how many people are seeing icons and do they know what it means?
Education.
So I think education is the right measure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair recognizes Dr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm never quite sure I understand this issue as much as I try and understand it. Ms. Lawler, did I 0.05% of people actually opt out?
Here's what I was saying is we were talking about the opt-out rates for
data sets that were anonymized information about users. Went through and was easily information that consumers had typed into search engines, and they identified people. And then
So, Ms. Woolley, so that said, I mean, that
Yes, it is troubling, and the whole issue of data breach is very troubling, and we need to be very careful about separating out privacy issues from data breach.
Ms. Dixon, would that answer satisfy you?
I think that what happened at AOL was part of an benchmarks and standards there are.
Yeah, but that was a data breach.
Excuse me?
It was a data breach.
I'm not so sure it was a data breach. Search engine, they relied on that AOL privacy policy that says, hey,
Appreciate that very much. I think this is an important point that needs serious clarification. You can find all of that data on any public figure right now by going to a bio. You can open a book, somebody's written their life story. You don't need to create an algorithm, you can just do that. Why aren't people just creating, I mean, other than the creating the Social Security number, but you're trying to protect people from, for example, any member of Congress, all that data is out there. So how is it different? Thank you
So
very much.
indeed, there are 2 points to make here. One specific to SSNs. In recent years, the regulatory approach has been towards making Social Security numbers less available because we know they are so sensitive. And in a way, that's well intended, good meaning. But the challenge we show with our results is that even if you make Social Security numbers less available in public documents, they can still be predicted from otherwise publicly available data.
Thank you.
And if I just thank you so much, Mr. Butterfield. But your point that you began with, I think facial recognition technology is troubling for everybody. But your point was you're not critical of Social Security numbers. You're talking about how easy it is to search because we could be taking a picture of any of you and suddenly by tomorrow have your Social Security number.
That's absolutely correct.
But this is the privacy debate. Is on the online world, we're asking for more than perhaps has been out there for years. And these things aren't happening. So I just want to point that out, and I have over-exhausted his time. So I need to, okay, yes, if you can respond briefly.
The Social Security number prediction is just an example of what can be done. The story we were telling with this recent study is that we are now close to a point where you can start from an anonymous face in the street and predict sensitive, not publicly available, but sensitive information about the person.
I thank the panel and the gentleman for yielding to me, and I'm happy to now recognize Mr. Stearns for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We hear from consumers and from researchers like the professor today, and even from Intuit's own research, that privacy policies are too complicated and consumers don't bother to read them. And myself, if it's 1 or 2 pages, I don't go further. And so I think most consumers just don't take the time. And then, of course, if the privacies are on the thin side and they're just such that they don't advocate enough and not protection. So I guess, how do we bridge the gap and provide full disclosure without alienating the average consumer who is not a privacy professional? It seems to me that's about where we are. If we're talking about a self-regulatory incentives, then you've got to have some kind of policy which bridges this gap and provides the information without confusing the consumer. So I thought I'd just go from my left to the right, maybe some ideas of how we could do this so that the consumers are educated, for one, and two, that the privacies are not complicated, and maybe the design work or something like that, some ideas.
We're experimenting with different types of what I would call explanations to customers, and that's really out of our research. And some of our early findings suggest, similar to what we've heard a little bit about today, but that an simple explanation in context. So you can't offer a big blanket opt-in or opt-out or whatever kind of choice at the beginning of something where it's not relevant to me. I don't understand it, and our customers have been very clear about that. And I think there's probably other studies that validate that. But in context, so we're actually running tests right now. We don't have the data yet. We'd be happy to come back and share that in a future time.
Okay.
One of the other things that we did that I think, just a couple of other quick thoughts, sir, is if we stop thinking about privacy policies and privacy statements and put it in this framework and this idea that's plain, simple, short explanations, you have to have a policy somewhere, but really what consumers want is something that's simple, easy to understand, real time. And if companies haven't done it, what I would suggest they do, which we did recently and have made improvements significantly, is run your policy statements, your explanation level analyzer. So we did that, and we've simplified our language so that it was closer to a 9th grade level rather than where we started a couple of years ago at 13th grade level.
Okay, let me just go through the panel here. I only got about 2.5 minutes left.
Yeah, to cut this short, I agree with everything Ms. Lawler said. I think that in our experience, the challenge is to get information in front of people when you're most likely to capture their eyeballs and their attention. And sometimes that means at the point of a decision making, when they're making a particular decision. that can be too disruptive because they're so anxious to get the thing done that they're trying to get done that if you put something in front of them, they're just going to hit cancel. The default is. So sometimes it's at the time you're installing a product. Sometimes it really sort of varies, and you get there a little bit.
But the point at which you get your attention is what you're saying. Yes,
yeah,
Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, very much so.
I mean, that's our business to figure this out. And the key thing I would...
Why don't you have privacy with a video? Just a quick, I never see anybody have a video for privacy.
Some companies, some of our clients do have videos in their privacy policies.
Somebody would say, do this, do that,
Yep,
do this.
it all depends on the segment. It's very hard to know which type of user is showing up in which particular experience, and the key is to create a layered experience so that it can stand up to the scrutiny of privacy advocates and academics, as well as be simple enough for someone to get through it in a few clicks. And that's part of the reason we did this partnership with Akamai, to get the first layer as close to the point where as possible, and then allow consumers who want more detailed information to dig through it, but not force them to read through a whole complex policy.
Gotcha. Ms. Wolf?
The goal that you mentioned is exactly the goal of the program, the Advertising Option Icon program. It is in 1 or 2 clicks, a simple explanation about what's going on.
Have you thought of using video
on it? A
on
deep
it?
privacy policy, and it's also, you can opt out.
Is there, instead of a narrative, do you think a video would be better?
There is not a video, but good idea. I mean, it's something we may try and do.
Because you see, across these websites, the ones that are more successful have videos instead of the narrative. Anyway, Professor?
2 solutions which need to complement each other. One is standardized, streamlined privacy policies, which are common in format across websites. This decreases the cognitive cost for the consumer. And the second, a baseline level of protection afforded through regulation.
Would that come from that baseline from the Federal Trade Commission? Where would that baseline come from?
For instance, for the Federal Trade Commission.
Ah, okay.
I agree with Professor Acquisti's remarks. I would just add one thing. We're talking about improving self-regulation of consumers. I think we ought to hear from the consumers, and the consumers ought to be part of that self-regulatory process and have a permanent and defined role in that process so they can give us direct feedback.
Good. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stearns. And the chair is happy to recognize Dr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
Mr. Heinz. Okay. Somebody, y'all have a phone, right? Y'all have a phone system. Microsoft does. If I log on my phone, I register my phone, I pull it out of the box, and I register it, and it says, hey, I'm Bill Cassidy, I'm da-da-da-da-da. And I also, again, have MSN. You spoke about this kind of firewall, if you will, between my Hotmail account and my MSN activities. But what if Apple or Google or Yahoo or you, I have a phone, and either I have the phone which your company provides, or I'm using the operating system that your company provides, or I am plugged into my browser on the phone. Is that data correlated with my desktop browsing?
No.
And do you speak just for Microsoft, or do you speak for
I'm speaking for Microsoft.
Standard?
I'm speaking for Microsoft. It depends. It depends on the scenario you're talking about. If you log in to your Hotmail account on a PC and then you log in to your Hotmail account on your phone, it's the same account. That data is connected on the back end. The problem is there's many different scenarios we can go through. If you are using a location-based service where we, as the operating service on the phone, is providing this location service, that location data comes up without any identifying information. It comes up only so that it can send back location information so that an application can take advantage of that. And on our back end, we don't store any unique IDs at all associated with the hardware or a user. And so, it really depends on the scenario. In a logged-in scenario is the one scenario where, yes, there would be a linkage across PC and
now, would this data be, could this data be, or is this data, when it is connected, is it collated, correlated, data-dated in order to further target me in a more sophisticated fashion?
We are just moving into mobile ads, and so in the future, I think the answer will be yes. But again, we would do that in a way that takes into account our own privacy standards, the standards that initiatives, et cetera. So yes, but people will have choice about that.
Okay. Ms. Dixon, what are your thoughts about that? Because you seem to kind of become from the most sort of we have to be concerned perspective.
Yeah, the tethered applications, mobile phones that are, there's certain hard encoding that Mike could tell you more about that links that phone directly to a person's identity in different ways than web browsing does. So when we're talking about linking ads to phone technologies, I think that we're entering a new arena. The self-regulatory regime in place for that is a code of conduct by the Mobile Marketing Association, and the codes are profoundly general. They're so general, it's unbelievable, and they're not protective at all. So a great deal of work would have to be done to reform this space or to regulate the space in order to provide baseline consumer
Ms. Woolley, what are your thoughts about that? And again, I'm going to cut you off in a second because I have one more question for Mr. Heinz.
Thanks. We are in the process of developing a program, building out the program where this icon will migrate to ads that are served on mobile devices. So a consumer will be able to not only see an ad on a mobile device, but he or she will be able to see the icon and opt out on that mobile device. And those choices, as we develop that program, expand that program to a mobile device, those choices must be honored by everybody in the chain of delivering that ad on a mobile device, the same way that the choices have to be honored.
So you agree with Ms. Dixon, but you feel as if that work is, that hard work is being done, if you will.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, Mr. Heinz, in your testimony, reference 19, comment, you say that even if responsible companies adopt strong practices and participate in self-regulatory initiatives, bad apples can spoil the whole bunch. Michael Jackson's Redux, huh? And government can play a role by setting baseline standards. Now, that's a little bit less libertarian than I think some of the others on the panel. But so you do see a role for government setting baseline standards. Mr. Stearns has legislation, which frankly I haven't read, but he referenced it earlier. Have you read it? And if so, if not, confess, but if so, what are your thoughts on it?
We have read it, and we've been on record for supporting baseline federal privacy legislation. That again, it would be principles based, not technologies based. It would have to be flexible and incorporate safe harbors for effective self-regulatory initiatives. But there are a lot of things in Mr. Stearns' bill that we're supportive of, and we are happy to work with this committee and your office, Mr. Stearns, on that as well going forward.
Much for being with us today. You've been quite gracious with your time, and I look forward to working with all of you again as we get closer to making some important decisions about the best ways to protect the online privacy of America and all of the members and staff of this terrific subcommittee for their participation. This was the fourth in our series of online privacy hearings so far this year. As the bits and bytes begin to add up, I think that we're getting closer and closer to understanding what the American consumers really want with respect to online privacy. I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit statements and questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to please respond promptly to any questions they receive. The hearing is now adjourned.